Welcome to the MediaCat Magazine podcast. Thank you for tuning in for the next in our series, Rebel with a Cause, with me, Opal Turner. For this series, we are talking about the relationship between creativity and strategy, or in my other words, art, science, and logic. Because it is my pet theory that strategy and planning can be a creative secret weapon and that we overly separate the disciplines in our industry. So today we are talking to the lovely Jo White, strategy and creative leader at Headland Consultants. Welcome to the podcast, Jo. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. So I wanted to start, Jo, with how we were introduced, because I think that's quite an important thing for us to discuss, because it's important to both of us, and one that I feel we don't really discuss enough in our industry. But all of us with hearts and brains are, in one way or another, one would hope, involved in increasing the diversity within our industry. But one of the much forgotten aspects of this conversation is class. So Snap's wonderful Jed Hallam started Common People, an industry forum for working class people in Adland, about a year ago. So shout out to all the Common People. Thank you, Jed, for an incredible platform. And thank you to the platform and to my partner, Luke, for introducing me to you, Jo. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'd like to start with that subject, if that's all right with you, because I'm starting to see that this podcast is really starting to attract folk who not only are both the rebel and the cause, but are also cause driven, me very much included. And so I'm intrigued. Do you think coming from a working class background has influenced the types of work you do and focus on? Does anything spring to mind?
Definitely more and more, increasingly so. I think like for the first 10 years or so of my career, I'm kind of into my 40s now, full disclosure. But I think for a long time I tried to cover up where I was from. So I'm from Wigan, but I would say, oh, I'm from Manchester. It would just be little subtle things like that. And then when I moved to London, there's lots of discussion in the group you just mentioned about accents. I really lost my northern accent quite quickly when I came to London when I was 19. So I think for a long time I tried to run away from it. I tried to escape it, and I tried to be part of that sort of London neutral professional class and sort of blend in as much as I possibly could. And it would have been absolutely abhorrent for me to bring my class background and my roots to the table. But increasingly, whether there's a kind of change, it's a change in the wind, groups like Common People just being able to talk about backgrounds that aren't sort of from privileged areas or from non-state school backgrounds, from paying schools and things like that. I just feel like I'm finding it more easy to talk about, and maybe some of it's age as well. But yeah, definitely I see it as a benefit. And once you start to look around, you realize how little of the world outside of the London bubble, the world outside that 1% bubble even, is represented in the work that we do and the conversations that we have. So yeah, it's kind of exotic, isn't it? I think at the moment.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Especially, in the context of the time that we're speaking, which is the UK is having a ridiculous cost of living crisis. Don't even get me started on the government. We're all over the place. But the right, fuck the Tories. That's my personal opinion, not that of
Get it
media.
all out. Get it all out.
But yeah, it is incredible. It is increasingly wild to me that, because recently I've been seeing, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, recently I've been seeing a lot of, okay, how do we advertise, how do we represent brands in a space where the cost of living is higher than ever and people are struggling. And like, I find it quite funny. I probably shouldn't. I find it quite funny that the general recommendation is, why don't you actually help? Try adding value to people's lives, and that's how you can represent your brand in the world right now. And I just often find that quite hilarious, to be honest with you, because I'm like, it's shocking. We should add things to
Totally.
people's lives.
I so agree. The fact that it takes this, and maybe it does take this, maybe we've been too comfortable for too long, and it takes this for to break down some of those barriers and for people to be sort of rehumanized in a way. One of the things we've been looking at in my current role is that shift from thinking of people as consumers into citizens, and just really understanding that, guess what? There's more to human beings than just a transactional moment of buying something, or, even those very base level needs that are having to be fulfilled in different ways with food banks, etc. At the moment, human beings are so much more than just the stuff that passes between businesses and, and their cupboards or whatever. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting shift that's going on at the moment, but it is kind of wild, isn't it, that that's a revelation in any way?
I know, especially since strategically we're always talking about, okay, what's the human truth? What's the reason to believe? Like, give me something that matters, and then create using that. So I'm kind of like, okay, well, welcome to strategy, everyone. It's called adding something. Um, but I mean, I'm happy to see it, and happy to see that there's some really nice work going on at the moment. Uncommon did a great piece with All Plants about not school dinners, and there's some really great work going on. But it has taken this cost of living crisis to get there for most people. Have you found that throughout your life, since you've kind of come to terms, come out almost as working class? How have you found that impacts the kind of work that you do, and the way that you focus what work you do?
Yeah, I think I'm aware of my privilege a lot more. I talk about working class. I mean, I came from a family in Wigan. My parents were teachers. I had a lot of privileges that set me on a good path and did well, and was able to sort of chase a whole load of opportunities. But being able to pass that back and kind of pay it forward, I think, whether that is in the work that we do and making it as inclusive as possible, making it as sort of humane as possible, but also, being able to challenge others, peers, clients who are also in positions of privilege and positions of power in any way that I can, to try and just make the world a bit better with my own puny career that I have, is something that I think about that all the time, literally every day. Uh, and I've really struggled over the last couple of years of thinking, do I just ditch agency world and go and work for an NGO, or go and work for somewhere where I really feel like I'm living out those values day to day? And sort of concluded that actually that privilege has given me a position that I shouldn't throw away, essentially, that I should use the skills and the position that I've built up over the last 20 years to try and make change from within the system, rather than ditching it all and go and kind of glue myself to a building or whatever, as much as at times it feels like that's an appropriate reaction.
Yeah, it's a crazy world right now, but it's interesting that you say that, because the last episode we had Josh Akapo from Archetype on, and he was saying, I judge the work that we do by how much it's minimizing harm, because we're in a system that is inherently harmful to marginalized folks, particularly. And then even that's obviously compounded when you have an intersectional identity. And so he was saying that it's our responsibility to minimize that, because it's going to happen, and I think we've all kind of come to the same conclusion as we go, should we be here, should we not be doing something quote unquote more valuable with our lives? And it's like, well, no, actually this industry that we are in, whether we like it or not, exists, and it is really fucking powerful.
Yeah.
And so I don't know about you, but I'd much rather have us in it, and have working class folk and disabled folk and everyone represented in that industry, instead of going, okay, well, as much as I'd love to screw over capitalism, I don't actually think I'm in charge of that. So
Totally. And once you open your eyes, and once you start sharing a bit more of your own background and your own vulnerability, it's surprising how many like-minded people there are, who are on their own path. They might have their own causes that they're championing or whatever, but I think just showing that you're up for more of an exploratory way of working, and putting social values at the heart of the work that you're doing within capitalism is, we all help one another, I think.
absolutely. I mean, honestly, that's a huge part of the reason that I did this podcast. I was like, I need to find my people. There must be other people who believe in the same things that I believe. let me get an excuse to talk to them for hours and call it work. It's great.
That's
Um, but it is exactly that. It's sometimes, we need that openness with one another so that we can find those commonalities. Because I very much feel you when you first come to London, even though I am now and was living 35 miles north of London. It's just a shocking amount of difference. And going into an office with really, really wealthy people who went to, fee paying schools and go skiing. Skiing was a thing for me that no one understood, that I'd never been skiing.
Oh no, I know. It's weird, isn't it? I had a conversation with someone where they were like, what did you do at the weekend? And they'd been off to go and see, their firstborn competing at fencing in Paris or something. And I was like, I was just in the pub. I don't know what to say.
I was watching Netflix in bed. Like,
Yeah,
there's
I'm
not a
really,
really good answer.
no, sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, no, it is insane because I didn't even really think of myself as working class so much as middle class or lower middle class. And
Yeah,
then I came into London and I was like, oh, this is middle class.
yeah. Oh, hello.
Right. I get it now. And again, Josh Akapo put it really greatly. He was like, if you are working to get a paycheck to survive month to month, you are working class.
Yeah,
That definition is incredibly powerful in a lot of ways because that puts a lot more of us in the same boat
yeah.
than otherwise.
I think like COVID was a massive curtain raise moment for me as well. Like literally, as you were starting to get a window into everybody's home lives, so people that you kind of saw as like, oh, they're like me, we're working on the same projects, etc. And then all of a sudden, you've got a window into their lives and homes. And on one hand, I was living in East London at the time, and I've got two kids, so we were homeschooling, and I was seeing the families of the children that my children are friends with. And in some instances, they're in a high rise, they're working from a single mobile phone, there's other people in the background, they're just trying to make it work as best they can. And then I would hop on a call with a colleague who would be in a kind of, wood paneled office somewhere in a country estate. And I found it really uncomfortable to find where my place was in all of these things. I remember someone saying to me, like, they were going to go and work from their parents' estate at the weekend. And I was like a bit shocked because for me, an estate is not what they meant. They meant like, I'm going to work in the cottage by the gatehouse on this huge country pad. And like, it really blew my mind. I hadn't ever really considered it in those ways before.
Yeah, no, just the word estate means very different things depending on where you came from. No, it's so wild that I mean, COVID did a lot of things, like that's very clear at this point. But to physically see on the same screen in your same location two such different, or multiple different, extremely different realities at the same time, and be the kind of the link, be the one in the middle. I can totally understand how, cognitive dissonance, right? You're like, wait, what?
Exactly
What?
that. I was like, how is there like a Venn diagram with me in the middle of these two different worlds? And where do I belong in all of this? And I suppose the confronting question is that, have I become a kind of class traitor? Have I been aspiring so much to the one that I've lost touch with the other, and trying to find my feet between those two things? And I think that's what led to that decision that, like, look, I am in this really unique power, and if I can position, and if I can straddle, and if I can help in any way to bring different sides together or different perspectives together, then however much cognitive dissonance there is, it's something that's a good thing.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because it's almost like that's where our industry is. Our industry remains the middle link, the space in between the general public and the 1% to a degree, because
Yeah,
that's what we're doing. We are selling products and services that generally make rich people richer, and so it's so much responsibility, but it is also so much power. But it is, I feel like it is a constant cognitive dissonance as far as I'm concerned, especially as uh like literal 30-year-old like anti-capitalist. I'm like, I do work in advertising though. I'm like, who am I don't know.
I know what's going on. Yeah, I know. maybe we can just tear the whole system down from within. I think that's my sort of inner hope. But
I mean,
um,
we're doing our best, guys. We're doing our best, I promise. But yeah, it is I really do think it's the nature of the industry to a degree. And then if you are inherently in between, you know, in your class position or your experience position as well, you're a bit like, what?
yeah,
Just
yeah,
constantly don't really know
yeah.
don't really know what's going on. But I wonder what you think about that experience and how much that has influenced the fact that you are both strategic and creative. Do you think that that has any relationship really?
I Yeah, I'm not sure. I suppose thinking back to my own kind of career path, I think for the last kind of 10 years or so, obviously I went through the kind of the early years where it's like, what the fuck is this? Somebody give me the money, where's the pub? You know, it continued like that for a while. And then I started to actually get interested in what I was doing. And the first part, I think, was becoming ever more strategic in the way that the industry would see it, and sort of labeling myself as that as well, and really leaning into those kind of reductive skills where understanding an issue at depth, you know, being able to kind of whittle it down and glean it down to a very fine point, and leaning into, I suppose, some of the more analytic and rational thinking that comes with strategy, at least from my perspective and from the type of career path that I've had. And I just wonder, I guess, with hindsight, is that a bit of my own insecurity? Because I think there's bias towards strategic thinking. People like things to be simplified and it makes them feel safe. You know, you can relatively easily, I think, in my experience, construct a rational flow and take people along with that. You can paint them a picture how all of these complex problems and, you know, all these huge opportunities that business has, you know, all of the different inputs that you would have into planning a campaign, pulling it down to a really fine point with strategy makes people feel safe, and it also makes them feel like you're smart, and it makes them feel like you're going to help them. What really takes massive bravery, I think, is to explode that back out into creative, and that demands a lot more of your own self to be put forward. The clients have to take a huge leap. We all have to get very uncomfortable when we start talking about creative, and again, that carries a huge amount of bias, but negative bias. That people don't like that, the risk, the potential, what if this, what if that. So I think, you know, in my more earlier years, leaning into strategy was probably because I was quite insecure, and I like to be more cerebral and come across as intellectual, etc. But now I realize actually the harder job, I think, is creative and taking people with you with a creative idea.
No, that's such a good point because it's kind of why I refer to it as the art and the science, right? It's easier to sell science to a scientist than it is to sell a piece of art
Yeah,
that by
right.
definition is subjective.
Yeah,
So especially in, you know, when you're in a C-suite, when you're in a room with people who literally look at numbers all day, it's much easier to go, there's a you know, a 50% opportunity here or whatever, than there is to go, this idea is really going to resonate with people on a really deeply human level, and that is going to be worth it.
yeah.
So it's funny, isn't it? Because I often feel like we kind of overuse and underuse strategy somehow at the same time.
Mm,
It's bizarre. It's bizarre, and I'm sure it's also part of why we lean into that data driven stuff as well, right? Because it's safer.
concrete numbers. Yeah,
Exactly. And
pie charts.
regardless of all of the bias that we put into how we get those numbers, people
Yeah,
can believe that that is solid
yeah,
and that is firm when often I feel like I feel much more confident in something that I can feel than someone presenting to me a number of impressions or something. I'm like, yeah, but
yeah.
how did you get there and what counts?
Yeah, totally. But you've got to make other people feel what you feel as well, haven't you? I think that's the,
Absolutely.
you know, you can really buy in with your heart to an idea, and everyone in the room can be feeling that magic and totally full of the potential and possibilities. We're all building on it. And then for some reason, you know, the balloon gets popped as soon as you walk out of that room, because the what ifs happen and the risk. And you go back in this sort of concertina shape you've got a strategy, you blow it out into creative, and then all of a sudden somebody starts doing that reductive thinking on the creative, and it starts to get minimized down to the point where it's got no magic left in it. So I think, keeping in that expansive frame of mind and keeping in possibility and keeping in creative mode, takes a lot of bravery, and not just from the creator or the creative team, but from everybody who touches that idea.
Absolutely, because as soon as you made that analogy of a balloon pops, I was like, I feel that. Like I can
Yeah.
literally feel that moment where it goes,
Whoop, killed it.
and you're like, oh crap, back into
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
Like you've got to live in, for an hour or whatever in a meeting, you've got to live in this incredible little world where something that you've created is gonna like change everything, and everyone believes in you, and you're an incredible human being, and then
Yeah.
it's gone. But that it's a really, I love the concertina analogy. You're full of great analogies today, Joe. Really digging it. The concertina is a great shout, because it's funny in some ways. I always think with strategy and science, actually, as a whole, is its primary job is to think wide, but its secondary job is to simplify and communicate that in the simplest way possible. So it's kind of got this inherent dissonance,
Yep.
just to overuse the word, of those two things kind of constantly fighting each other. And I often think that that's one of the things that is the same in creativity, because you're constantly trying to get to this really kind of intangible, massive idea of, I don't know, motivating someone, for instance, to, I don't know, I'm thinking this girl can go and exercise and feel good about yourself. This huge idea, this huge thought, this huge emotion, and somehow you need to get that across in a script, and it's
Yeah.
actually 30 seconds, and it's actually got to be made on this much money, and there's all of these other things that you have to do. And so it's, in some ways, I find that dissonance like oddly comforting,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the same, there's a similar dynamic in both disciplines, in a way. Does that make sense?
It does. I think and some degree of concertinaing as you go through the creative process to get something actually kind of birthed into the real world. I think, there's so many adjustments and, conversations about casting or conversations about the script, as you say, and then even, the talent and the actors and everything that they brought into those adverts. It was so much about them and how they showed up and how relatable those new role models. It's like, it's probably about 10 years ago now, but actually it was so groundbreaking at the time to see, women and girls kind of presented like that, wasn't it? So many moments of creativity went into that piece of content, and then also how it was kind of released and the public reaction to it, how people felt about it. So yeah, I think it is probably a big concertina, but with lots of little concertinas that sort of follow on, don't they?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Can you tell us a bit more? Because you kind of mentioned that you came to London when you were 18. And I know this is like such a cliche question, but I am genuinely actually interested in
Oh,
how people kind of got into the industry, and looking back at it specifically, because
yeah.
I'm only like 7, 8 years into my career, but I still look back at, how I came into the industry very differently than I did back when it happened. So I'm interested kind of what your journey in was, and how much both disciplines came into that, or when you made that switch, so to speak.
Yeah, so I came to London to go to uni. That was my entire thought process, was that I just wanted to be in London. I came to uni, and that was sort of how I got to London, but it was all about being in the cultural centre, being in a centre where all of the kind of action was happening. You can imagine me sort of peering down from my parents' home in Wigan, like, what's that? All of that over there. Like, I just want to land myself in there, basically. So I did that, and I did my degree in psychology, and I was not a good student, to be fair. I hadn't realized, actually, talking about art and science, I hadn't realized how much hard stats and maths and data was involved in psychology, because I was really into psychological theories and even philosophy and things like that side of things. But I spent 3 years, working with data and working with graphs and things like that, and really absolutely hating it. But it was a good discipline anyway. And from there, I realized I did not want to do that with my life. Everybody else went off to join the NHS and private practice. And I was like, no. And like a lot of people, I'd always looked at journalism as an option for me because I loved language, I loved being creative, I loved writing, I loved poetry, reading, all of that stuff. So I'd looked at journalism as a way forwards, realized that it was a kind of, 2 years living on basically no money and a huge scrabble to get a job of any worth that wasn't a kind of packaging trade magazine or something like that. No disrespect to anybody, but I was like, okay, this isn't quite what I thought. So I learned about public relations from there. Didn't really understand what it was. Continued to not understand what it was for a good 5 years. But it seemed like if I turned up, and sort of did what I was told, then people paid me money, and that was sort of okay. So it was only when I was kind of 25 ish that I started to get really serious about it. And I landed on my feet with an agency called Unity and a lovely lady called Nick Govier, who is now my husband's business partner, fortunately, because we've stayed in touch. And she is just one of the most special people who brings together all the qualities that you've been talking about. Just a lovely human being who tries to bring in so many social causes and so much of her own heart and passion into her work. So I was really lucky early on to be like, okay, this is possible. I can do good and exciting work that's creative, that genuinely makes a difference. I can find people I relate to. Sometimes you just fall in with a tribe that really resonate with you. And I sort of had a second university moment over those 2 or 3 years. And from there, it all got a bit kind of serious, doesn't it? That's where I sort of started to move into more strategic comms over kind of 10 years. And I don't know. I sort of stumbled along with it, really. I think most people do. Although, I look at some of our young talent that's coming in now, and it's so much more formalized. I think the training, the different groups that you can be part of across the industry, and the voice and the weight that junior talent has now, I think is actually a really good thing. I think of myself just kind of in the cuttings room, basically doing admin and, organizing lunches and things like that. I hope that people coming into the creative industries now get more voice quicker.
And that has so much to do with leadership, though, right? It has to do with people like you in a position where they can encourage that. And I wonder how, I mean, it sounds like you had an incredible kind of mentor type person, which is always incredible to finding your people early on is just a privilege that I don't think can really be fully explained. But I wonder how, after you almost left that bubble, that safe place where you did all your learning and stuff, how did you find the industry reacted to you? Because you essentially, as you say, it wasn't formalized. You had this kind of very kind of intuitive, natural understanding of I need to think strategically, but I also want to do this. And I find sometimes that then you leave a certain environment and you go out into the world, and the world is like, no, why don't you fit in one box? I don't understand. And you're like, there's boxes?
Yes, so many boxes. And sometimes you've got to sort of get into a box and then, widen the box or create a new box for yourself or whatever. Yeah, so I think that kind of mid phase of your career is really difficult, where you're not 100% empowered, or maybe more people are these days, or more than me, to define what it is that you want and define. I assumed that a lot. I assumed that other people would shepherd me through. I assumed that other people would just progress me in my career if I did what I was told, if I did a good job. I've always been hardworking, but you sort of get to that stage where you're like, well, why is this not evolving for me? And part of that, I think, still comes from being a bit institutionalized from the education system. You're used to just being told where to go and what to do. And it takes a while to realize that nobody is coming to save you. Nobody's coming to help you. And actually, you do need to kind of muscle up a bit to create the roles that you want, and be prepared to move and be prepared to speak up to be able to get them, really.
I do feel like there's almost like a realization moment that most people have, but specifically people who have marginalized identities in one way or another, where you go, oh, meritocracy is fully a myth.
Yes. Oh, totally. Totally.
And you're like, oh, so I'm not going to do well because I'm smart and I work hard.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I need to think about this differently then,
Yeah,
because that.
that's wild, isn't it? That's a crazy one, and so true. So many people that I've worked with, over the last 2 decades, who've been really diligent, hard workers, putting in all the hours, turning out all of the work, and just being overlooked for completely qualitative reasons, completely subjective reasons. They're just not got enough kind of social currency with the right people. They're not putting themselves, there might be a small niggle with them that is somehow unbalancing all of the incredible work that they're doing. Yeah, somebody said to me the other day, it keeps cropping up in my mind, that the system isn't broken, the system is rigged. I was like, I keep coming back to that every day. I was like, oh, that's so true. It's so interesting. The people who hold the power, that power is disproportionate and it's favoring them all the time. So to come in, particularly somebody who's from a minoritized community or somebody who's got more barriers to deal with, it's so hard, and we've all got to be aware of that.
Yeah, it is exactly that, isn't it? If the system is not broken, it's working exactly how it was designed to, and it just wasn't designed for a bunch of us. Just wasn't designed for a bunch of us. And I do feel like that is, I mean, at least from my experience, is part of what pushes some of us to become more multidisciplinary. We do have, those barriers. We have more things to deal with or overcome, or simply just more on at any given time,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's because you need to work during university because you can't just study and have enough money to live, especially not
Yeah,
in
for sure.
the modern day. It's almost like the compounding effect of those kinds of things, I feel, pushes us to be a bit more like, okay, well, I can't make all of my money from here, or I can pay my rent from here but not my bills, so I'm going to have to go and do that thing over there. And you almost just have this adaptability and willingness to go, okay, well, I have this skill, I can do that with it, but I have this skill and I can also do that with it, and therefore, you know I you don't ever necessarily pick. And I wonder, that comment about formalizing the processes in a lot of the industry now, which in so many ways is absolutely fantastic. But I wonder what you think kind of individuals and organizations could be doing better to kind of understand and appeal to folk who are not just from marginalized backgrounds, but people who just don't necessarily put themselves in one box, who are more multidisciplinary than that. Because I'm constantly surprised. I was doing some research into recruitment companies and stuff the other day, and the amount of jobs and recruitment companies who still require you need to have a can line, you need to have a blah 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 list of experience, list of specific skills that you can have, even though you could just learn them on the job like normal people. um I find it still, from my perspective at least, it looks like still quite a hostile environment for
Yeah.
multidisciplinary folk. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, can we just get rid of CVs completely? I think like the best way to sell yourself, and again, this is contingent on you having the network to be able to do it, on you having the self-confidence and belief and the vision for what you're actually trying to achieve, which are huge, huge things. But, just selling yourself in person, like being able to make those human connections and come across as somebody, to your point, you just feel it in your heart, those really deep gut reactions to like, I just know this person is going to be a brilliant cultural fit. I know that, yes, there might be some box ticking that needs to be done, and yes, 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 we work from that perspective, but there's so much more, there's so much more sitting beneath the waterline almost of what this person is, their potential, the energy that they're going to bring into the business. I think that's an aspiration, to be able to hire like that, to get it through a light touch process, I suppose, but also be able to go with your gut and be able to just hire people on the basis of their whole self. and their whole potential self as well. But I mean, it is not easy on either side for candidates, but for businesses as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that is the thing. Like at the end of the day, we are still working in largely for profit businesses, and so how much do you think it is? Is it that organizations and individuals in kind of hiring power positions need to see the value in multidisciplinary folk, or do you think they simply get caught up with the box ticking exercise? I wonder what you think is kind of the disconnect there.
Yeah, there's a balance, isn't there? I think generalists have been undervalued for a very long time. And being good at many, many different things is becoming increasingly important. And the agency where I'm a partner at the moment, Headland, breadth is breadth. Well, you want breadth and depth, essentially, so that's always the tension. We have to have people who can glue things together, who can jump across different campaign plans, across different clients, etc., make connections, look at one thing and splice it together, which is a creative act in itself. I think if you're a generalist and you've got a really broad remit, very broad experience, very broad skill set, you're much more likely to be able to make that creative magic happen because you spot opportunities all the time. So yeah, elevating generalist skills, looking for, good all-rounders. I remember full of all of these analogies today, but I remember reading in some trashy, I think it was Ant Middleton's book about the SAS program on Channel 4, whatever. He was like, if you're in the SAS, you're not brilliant at any one thing. You have to be a really, really good all-rounder at loads and loads of different skill sets. So I think just understanding that generalists are elite in their own way. You will always need specialists. You will always need people who can add the extra depth and work with generalists. But without them, we are completely unstuck.
It's never an either or, is it? We've kind of fooled ourselves into thinking that it's an either or situation. It's funny that you make that what's his name,
And Middleton.
Ant
It's really
Middleton.
not a good reference point, is it?
No, I love it. I love it though because the SAS is elite by
Yeah,
definition. We
totally.
refer to them as an elite unit, and it is that kind of general cultural issue with not seeing that value in generalists. And polymaths is one of my favorite words because it sounds
Great
smart.
word. A great word. I'm writing it down right now.
Okay, good. Because and we've talked about this on the pod before, because it is how these different skills are treated to a point. And I kind of always think of, I liken it to the language of intelligence, because traditionally intelligence has meant logical intelligence. It's been the most highly prized. You're thinking traditional icons of quote unquote genius. You think Einstein. Also almost always a white man, just saying.
Yeah.
But my favourite examples of genius are Da Vinci, because he had incredible amounts of
Bonkers.
creative
Yeah,
intelligence
totally.
and logical intelligence. And, Helen Keller is another
Yeah.
fave, because I couldn't even sit here and list all of the types of intelligence that she had. Like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
And so it is this cultural mismatch, isn't it? That we've and it does make complete sense, to be clear, but I mean capitalism is somewhat built on specialism to a degree. But that's why in a lot of ways I kind of feel like now more than ever is the time to embrace generalists, to embrace multidisciplinary folk, to embrace creative as much as strategy, and do them together, because we have more than ever to deal with. We
Yeah.
have bigger jobs than ever to do as an industry. But in some ways, I feel like we're at quite a tense point in the industry, quite a dramatic change era. Not dissimilar from the incredible tension I can imagine you would be in, obviously not on the same level in any way, shape or form, but it's that kind of extreme pressure that we're under, I feel, as an industry and as individuals, to be clear, and regardless of what industry you're in, we're under more pressure
Yeah.
than ever from more places than ever. I wonder who are the kind of, do you have any kind of icons that you look to, people that kind of inspired you along the way, not necessarily historical, but do you want to shout out anyone?
I mean, I literally have a historical figure in mind, which I'm
Go.
just going to shout out anyway. But like Josephine Baker, I only mention this because you were like, just Da Vinci, people who can be so many different things in one lifetime. It just absolutely blows my mind. So, like, to go from, her stage shows and her banana costumes and all this amazing creativity and expression of her identity as a black woman, and then to be a spy in the Second World War, like at another moment in history where there's so much tension, existential tension, and then to just go and absolutely just boss it and be a spy across Europe.
And
So,
then she went on to create her quote unquote rainbow tribe of
yes. And she
of
had a
just,
pet cheetah, which is
I
just
mean, the woman was a vibe. Let's be clear. I mean, there was,
right.
there different points of view on whether she should have created the rainbow tribe, but the woman was a
Sure.
visionary.
So completely. And I didn't realize that she was like the warm-up act for for the I Have a Dream speech. Just, yeah, we should talk about her more. But I think that just following things that you're passionate about, having the bravery to just live your most full life and be your best version of yourself, is the absolute pinnacle for all of us. And smashing down those boxes and refusing to be defined even by one period of your life or one role, is something to be aspired to, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And it is funny, isn't it, though, that we find it easier to look back to find those kind of people, even though in this era of, well, the idea of celebrity is obviously massively changing at the moment. But even if you look at celebrities, look at the kind of pinnacle of modern day celebrity, the Kardashians. Really didn't think I'd be ever talking about the Kardashians on this podcast,
We've
but here we
really
are.
covered a lot of ground.
Really have. I know pop culture too, guys. Oh my god. No, the Kardashians are businesswomen. They are
For
creatives. They
sure.
are creators. They are actors. They are all of these different things, and we don't find it surprising somehow when a celebrity goes, "I'm going to start a business. I'm going to."
True.
With in some ways, we criticize them. We go, "What? You're trying to capitalize on your first skill set? How dare you?"
Yeah, so true.
But when you're sitting in a room, I don't know, interviewing for a position or something, and someone's like, "Well, I actually also do this." You're like, "Well, I'm not, but some people seem to have this, but that's not what I'm asking for from you."
Yeah. Yeah, completely. It is that weird one-way relationship, isn't it? Where you feel like you're, relate to them and friends with them, and then they go and how dare they do better than you, basically.
It's wild, isn't it? It's just so interesting how we find it so much easier to look. I mean, I guess it's just part of human nature in a way, but to look back rather than look forward. But in thinking about looking forward and looking to the future, do you think that, and this is it sounds like a trick question, but I do genuinely mean it. Do you think that Adlan is genuinely changing? It's such a big question, I know. I
Such
just dropped
it,
that one.
yeah, it is such a big question. I think it is because it has to, and it's not alone in that. It all needs to change. The challenges that we have, we've talked about COVID, we've talked about the cost of living crisis, and they're all just warm-up acts for climate change, collapse of biodiversity, all of these, the big acts that are to follow. So in a way, it's kind of good that we've had some muscle memory develop about how we adapt in crises, and especially when they come as a fast volley. And all of us have seen our clients have to shift, and
Such a
our
good point.
agencies have to shift, but probably not fast enough, I would say. I think we're still really struggling with yeah, but we've all just got to sell as much as we can. We've all still got to, we've got to be at what we've always been before, but wear different clothes, wear a different skin. We haven't quite assimilated all of that yet, but there are good people, and even good people aren't good all the time. We all struggle with that dissonance that you've talked about. You can have the best of intentions in the world, but we all have needs and wants and aspirations and mortgages and all of the other stuff as well. If we're humans, and we're in a society that's been built up over centuries. So yeah, I think we are, and I believe in it, but I wish it was faster.
So I think we can really agree on that. It is I feel for sure that the least kind of institutionalized like players in the game are definitely moving at that quicker pace.
Yeah,
And I'm
agree.
absolutely biased, by the way, because my first job was with startups, but I can see so much potential for kind of new folk coming up and new shops setting up, um, to really change how things are done. And I'm interested, and I'm not implying that you will leave the wonderful headland, but if you were setting up shop by yourself right now,
Hmm.
Joe, it's you.
Oh
What are you
God.
gonna do? Who are you hiring? Like, if you're hiring a team, how would you organize that for that future that we've just spoken about?
I would love to work more with activists. So I'm involved with various sort of activist roles myself, but also I'm really lucky to work with clients who are starting to work with activists, not treating them as influencers or talent or anything, but just really understanding their drives, what it is that they're trying to change and the change they embody in the world. I think trying to find a way to bring them together with business, even just on a listening basis, but then ideally on a kind of co-creation basis, I think would be really exciting space to be in at the moment. And hopefully something that would grow.
And we have so much to learn, right? We have so much to learn from activism, kind of strategy and tactics and creative. I mean, I often think of Extinction Rebellion is an incredible brand.
Yeah, such
In-
an incredible brand. I was with them. I went with Greenpeace actually, but I ended up in this bunkhouse staying with Extinction Rebellion last year at COP, and they're literally on the floor with pieces of cardboard and sellotape and markers and face paint. They have no budgets, they have nothing but their absolute belief in the message.
yeah.
And they're out at the crack of dawn doing media calls and interviews and everything. The amount of energy that they put into their campaigning is really, inspirational. And yeah, like creative from nothing, right?
It's incredible, and it's the execution as well. Like they have such a strong belief, such a strong idea. But we were at the my partner and I went to the protesting in King's Cross, the Enough is Enough and Just Stop Oil
Oh
protest,
yeah.
and standing with striking workers. And
Mm.
it sounds wildly ridiculous because I have boiled it down to this, but the fact that Extinction Rebellion always bring the music,
Yes, the
the
drummers.
vibe,
Oh,
the band,
so right. It's so right.
it's brilliant. It's brilliant marketing because there we are shutting down King's Cross. Everyone's really annoyed, but
They have
it's
samba.
really hard to be really annoyed when you're doing a little samba, when there's a little marching band, and there's colour and there's like it makes it so much more attractive to
That's so
protest.
true. It's so true. I'm fascinated by Extinction Rebellion because I think I remember when I first came to London when I was at uni, it was all the May Day riots and stuff, and people were like,
Mm.
doing kind of Molotov cocktails everywhere and smashing the banks up and everything, and it's all over the media, and they were so demonized. And I know that there is still huge demonizing of eco zealots and all of the Daily
Increasing,
Mail
of course.
type of language, yeah, which is a worry. But I think you're right. I think turning up non-violent action, turning up with a band, being colorful, and just having, there's so many scientists and lawyers, and they're actually really smart professional people. You can't boil them down to the level of kind of thugs and anarchists. It's just not
And
that.
you can't boil them down to one discipline either. There's as much kind of like Gen Z like haven't are still in school in Extinction Rebellion as there is, professors in
Yeah,
climate, literally.
yeah.
So it is inherently, and that's one of the things that I think you're absolutely right on. We can learn so much from activist groups because if you look, I mean, it's even just kind of obvious. Like, look at culture, look at the massive changes that have happened in history, the civil rights movement, the women's movement. They haven't happened because of general advertising.
Yeah, totally,
They
totally,
happened because of
totally.
activism.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing for me because I think because with those movements and with the climate movement, um, where there's no money, it's so much more simple, because I'm involved with Greenpeace as well, but that's a fundraiser and that's a more traditional charity structure. So there's always a need to fundraise, to ask people for money as well as talk about the issues. Whereas with XR and those types of groups, there's no money, there's no hierarchy. Everybody's, there because they want to be there, whether they're 20, whether they're 80, etc. So you don't have that same structure that you have in the corporate world or in the sort of more structured traditional NGO and charity world as well. I think that's really liberating. But back to the kind of startup concept, like that's what really I would love to chew over. How do you take commercial organizations and bring them together with activism and try and find a space where the benefits of both can support each other?
What an incredible challenge that would be. Let's do that. Like that would just be such a fun day one day to just sit down and have a bunch of people that you like just go, okay, if we were going to do this, how would we do this? And then how do we all take that away and input that into our actual day-to-day work? Be such a fun
strategic and creative challenge.
I mean, right?
Samba drums, surely don't lose the samba drums.
No, we could be at the pub, it would be fine. Pub music vibes, but also thinking about creatively and strategically how to change the world. Very, very much sounds like a great day to me. I mean, it's hard to follow on from that, so I'm going to go straight to just my very last question. Get it, boil it back down. What do you think about my theory that creatives need strategy and can make better use of it?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think you need that jumping off point, don't you? You need a clear articulation. What is that? It's not a thing. You need a clear articulation of what it is that you're trying to kind of do in the world, especially in a commercial context. I think you're in a more purely creative role and organization. For artists, do they have a strategy? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they do to some degree, or maybe the creative process is just much more freeform there. But certainly in the commercial world, you need that pinpoint strategy to be able to come up with creative that's relevant and that's has a hope in hell of being activated, I think, to give your clients and your teams the confidence to be able to actually move it forwards. But yeah, I think to be able to flip between the two is the real trick. From a generalist perspective, to go on a journey with a team where you are in that reductive mindset and you're getting down to really analytical thinking and you articulate what the strategy is, and then to just go like, right, bring on the samba drums. Where are we going to go with this? And to get back out into that playful mode. That's the real trick.
No, and I think I completely agree, but I also love, yes, another analogy, Joe, coming through. I live for it. The artist analogy is so interesting because just taking an analytical mind to looking at artists and what has made them great, we would never call it strategy, but I think a lot of them had, an element of science, an element of logic and understanding of their distinct point of view in the world and how to maintain that and stick to it and be consistent.
Yeah.
Consistency, underrated part of strategy, in my opinion.
Yeah. Apart from Leonardo da Vinci, who was anything but.
No, exactly. But he always took the same kind of approach. I would say maybe consistency and approach rather than thinking.
Yeah, which just leads me to another point as well about like the word creativity, I think sometimes being a blocker for some people who are scientifically minded or rationally minded and thinking about innovation. I would definitely say that's the consistent point through Da Vinci, isn't it? Like everything was so innovative to the point where they went on to become inventions and technological solutions that way live past him.
Innovation has almost become the business friendly word for creativity.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a Trojan horse, I think, to get the standard in.
Trojan horse in language. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Such a great chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure.